we wanted to kind of take a step back and not just focus on people who are building on mud today, but people who are building applications and protocols that are really boundary pushing and are really interesting, and we would love to see build on mud one day, and are sort of exploring the space in their own way and sort of trying to figure out what more can be done. So first off, I would love everybody on the panel. Also, I'm Vera, I work at Lattice. I work on comms and external relations. But yeah, I would love for everyone on the panel to really quickly introduce themselves and just what they do in this space.
Danny, Aranda. I started a project called PartyDAO. We built a product called Party that allows people to use Ethereum together in groups. Woo. Thank you.
Before I begin, this room is full of like the highest caliber people. You got Reggie, Sean, you got Ellie here, you got David from Bankless, you got Jose back there, you got Benji from Optimism. You got everyone here. I tweeted just recently that, just like 5 minutes ago, I was like, dude, like, bear market is sick, because look, all the builders are here in this basement looking thing with this blue screen on here, and we're building shit, so that's sick. Props to yourself for coming. I'm Benny, I'm from Vancouver, Canada. Raise your hand, FP team in the back. So Future Primitive, we're building, we launched a new standard, ERC-6551. We turned every NFT into having its own smart contract account. And then now we're building a protocol around that. So nice to be here. No.
I'm not gonna try and I'll do that intro, but I was just saying, Benny was the first person I ever talked to way long before I co-founded a project called Sound, and was a very kind internet stranger that talked to me for no reason. I had no idea what I was building, and he just would always speak to me anytime I called him. And it's cool to be on a panel with him today. But I started Sound. I'm from New York, and it's a place to upload music and collect music on chain. So really excited to be here, and cool to see so many friends in the audience.
Cool. So for my first question, I would love to kind of chat about the state of on-chain applications today and kind of what we see. And I think like the narrative pre-L2 proliferation was like, okay, once we have L2s, like the really crazy shit will start to happen. And the really crazy shit will like begin to propagate on L2s. And I feel like we're like in the post-L2 state. We're starting to see some interesting things, but the crazy shit actually hasn't really started yet, or doesn't fully feel that way. So first of all, do you agree with the premise? And then second of all, if you do, why do you think it is? And if you don't, also, why not? Danny, I will start with you.
The premise that we're in a post-L2 world?
We're in a post-L2 world, but we're not seeing like the post-L2 applications to go along with it.
Yeah, I actually think EVM infrastructure has been like good enough for a while, like maybe over a year or two, to actually start building like application layer experiences that could reach like larger audiences. There might be like some limits to that, and L2 is helpful towards that. But I think even L1, even if it's not perfect, it's kind of good enough to make something that's like a hit application. Yeah. And I think we're only like just starting to see it. I mean, like someone shared a stat on Twitter the other day that was like Friendtech generated more fees than Ethereum the other day. I mean, like you're starting to see like that's like a very like clear example of like value capture, like moving up the stack, and I actually think that's kind of an exciting moment.
I would ask the question of what is crazy shit. I mean, breeding cats was kind of crazy shit. And so if it's about users, I mean, like, I think there were quite a lot, like Top Shot had like millions of users. There's applications out there that have millions of users. Starbucks Odyssey has got hundreds of thousands of users. It's just hidden underneath all of the disguise or whatever. So I think there's crazy shit. I think the main thing is just creative ideas. I mean, where's Web3 dating? Where's virtual cars? Where's like all this crazy shit? Like we need new ideas. Stop trying to recreate Minecraft. Stop trying to copy what is Web 2. Like just come up with new ideas. Like I was tweeting like, Ace Hotel should have chairs that have NFC chips. Every time you sit on it, it mints on-chain moment. Like, why not? Like, it's kind of funny. So it's just the creativity I think that's missing. I think Reggie is going to be the creative director of the Ethereum Foundation, so he'll be the one leading the charge. FWB Fest people would know that, but he'll be leading the charge. Yeah. So anyway, it's about creativity, in my opinion, rather than copying. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think for me, I think like the L2 kind of push has like brought in some things that I think are positive, and some different experiments that you maybe wouldn't have run. But I think it's also introduced a series of like different onboarding challenges and different. Now everyone has like 12 ETH balances on different chains, and I think for the average user, like they don't care or understand why. And so I think, and to Benny's point, like I do think that. Building the future doesn't always, it sometimes rhymes with the past, but I think it does look a little bit different, and I think just copying Web 2 things into Web 3 is not necessarily the right strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you also bring up another important point, which is that it's not just the infrastructure that you're running directly on. It's like all of the ancillary products around it. It's like your wallet, it's your bridging, it's all of these other things.
Indexing.
I think one thing for me that I feel fairly strongly on is like what chain you're on is an irrelevant point to like why they should be using your product.
Yeah.
Especially if you're building an application, like what problems does it actually solve? And at least for me, like I feel like the chains and wallets is like too prominent still in terms of like, why I should mint something or where it's coming from. And I think at the end of the day, it's real use cases and real problems.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Benny, what do you think is holding back new original ideas?
Jumpsuits, maybe.
Jumpsuits. We all need to.
I'll say the only bridge I'll cross is the Brooklyn Bridge. So, all these L2 bridges, there's too many of them.
Cool. I would love to talk about an ambitious project or feature that you guys have deployed. And was there a moment in time when you realized that deploying such a thing would be possible on Ethereum? Was there a stage when it was an idea and you were like, I don't even know if this would be possible? And then something changed and it became possible, or was it just immediately possible from the get-go? So I'd love to hear about that process for each of you, and maybe I will start with David this time.
I think that's. Are you talking about mainnet, or are you talking about like anything in the
anything that you've deployed? Ideally, not a full product. Ideally, one feature, one thing, one.
Yeah, I think we ran an experiment over the last couple of months with got some of the parts right in the wrong orders, but we ran this experiment with Sound Swap, which was like a bonding curve where you could collect the song and the price would rise. Might have made the curve a little too flat, but other than that, didn't realize there was such demand for speculating. Yeah, I thought it was something that and we're managing all balances for all the liquidity in one single contract. Just something that and obviously we were inspired obviously by doing this in layer 2 because the transaction costs to deploy everything were just much cheaper. So that was something that I was particularly, just from an engineering perspective, I thought was really interesting. Whether it panned out, I think, is still TBD. But I think I've been really interested in just new ways to collect music, and I think music is a bit of an interesting art form in that it's pretty permanent. It's it doesn't disappear after a week or a month, or it's not like an open edition or kind of a a more fixed thing. Something that's lasts forever, and so we've always been just trying to play around with new collecting formats.
My NFT, which is an All Stars, collects music NFTs. So what's really interesting is this idea that now an NFT has an account. Let's say you have an All Stars that's the address is 0x123. It's the same address across Optimism, Polygon, Arbitrum, Zora Chain. So it really means if on the Sound chain or the L2, I could actually collect those items to that same address that is still owned by a mainnet asset, right? So this whole bridging and cross-chain identity system dissolves into the background. And one of the main things that we kind of arrived at this idea was we were launching a project with Jeff Staple called the Sapiens Project. It was a PFP project where we wanted to be able to equip digital clothing. But we ran into a bunch of roadblocks. We looked at Artifact Doodles, all these other projects. But we wanted to be on mainnet, on chain. We wanted to be gasless to equip the digital clothing. We wanted ownership to be tracked on chain. So actually that project led us to 6551 on the idea that an NFT has an account. So I think the L2 future is something that we're betting on as well, because the way I see it is autonomous worlds and like NPCs or like 6551 are like the perfect combination. Because if autonomous worlds are their own chains, you're going to need assets to be able to communicate across mainnet and L2. So they're dual infrastructure that works together.
The question was most ambitious feature.
Yes. Yeah.
I think with a lot of the things we release where maybe we feel a little bit over our skis, the challenge becomes just making it like very digestible to the end user to get the behavior that you're going for. Probably the biggest change we've done so far is late last year we released like V2 of the protocol. The first version of our product allowed people to essentially like crowdfund all on chain and then buy an NFT and own that NFT together, like fractionalize it in the background. The V2 of the protocol allowed people not just to buy an NFT, but then govern it. And it had kind of like all these Governor Bravo style features. Plus there were kind of UX features like, your ownership in the party would be represented by an NFT. The NFT was an on-chain SVG that was actually dynamically reading the party to tell you what your voting power was in the party or like what proposals were in the party. So there was a bunch of complex stuff happening around crowdfunding, governance, all this like transaction execution stuff to allow a group to actually like do things on chain together, and just making that digestible to an end user in like a really simple way through the UI and just the way you articulate the product, even on Twitter, just all the way from like when someone like sees the tweet down to like when they're actually using the product and like submitting transactions, just like making that very digestible to the end user was probably the hardest thing that we really had to think about.
Very cool. I like how all of these examples really are like primitives for autonomous worlds, if you want to use that term. It's sort of like you have an economy and sort of a way of structuring an economy. You have, NPCs to inhabit your worlds. You have governance and sort of social structures. So that's very cool. Okay, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about sort of the word that I think people use the most to describe what NFTs do or what they enable is ownership. And I think you guys are building products that definitely do enshrine ownership, but they do a lot of other things as well. And I think if you want to have a richly inhabited world, you need to be able to do other things than just own something. So I'm curious, if you had to describe another capability, another thing that NFTs can do, another thing that NFTs can enable beyond ownership, kind of what would you choose? I will go with Danny first because you saw the questions earliest, I think.
Right, okay.
You had the longest amount of time to think about this.
One framework, like a 2x2 matrix, would be NFTs can have functionality, right? They're a smart contract. You can build all types of functions to them that they can go do things. And then the other axis might be dynamic, because you can update the renderer based on the state or whatever functions you're calling. And so in the bottom left of that matrix would be your very basic NFTs, like a CryptoPunk. It's just an image, and it doesn't do anything. You can transfer it. That's pretty much about it, right? And so that's enough actually for a whole market to form around it and do speculation or just trading on an art asset. I think if you start moving further up towards the right, what you could see are things like an early example is like a Uniswap V3 position, right? Like an NFT. That's like a functional thing that is both like a small UI into something that's happening in a protocol, plus it represents like the ownership over like an LP position in Uniswap. And so I think there's still like a ton of design space to experiment with that. I mean, like if an NFT collection can be like a full-blown computer program, there's a lot that you can do with that. Yeah. And to some of the points earlier in the earlier presentations, like you can build like a whole game around those types of things. And I think it's interesting to see people like explore like the NFT itself, like being the interface, like it's like a token with a UI that you could like call functions in and go do things within. So I think like that type of experimentation would be really interesting to see. And I think, again, I think there's like still a lot of white space around that. I think people have been like very hung up on like very specific use cases for NFTs that basically render them as like inert IPFS files, but there's a lot more.
I see 3 phases. Just own it, just do it, just program it. We're now transitioning to the just do it. It's a nod to Nike. So everything you described about an NFT doing things on chain, we call that networked playable characters. So very soon, we actually were at the hackathon and we had this crazy idea of like, what if we combine a Flashbot performing MEV with an NFT? What if we bought a Deadfellows and then we linked up like a liquidation MEV strategy where the Deadfellows goes on chain and liquidates people's position, and we call it the Reaper. And then we had a Twitter account where it would like shit post and be like, yo, I just reaped your shit. And I think that's a reality. I'm not even making this up. I think we were scheming with the Flashbot team and we're like, dude, I think this can be done. So we're getting into a reality that NFTs, because they have their own account, which is an Ethereum account system, and they have the ability for asset ownership, social identity, and programmability, that now they can actually be, an NFT can be a signer on a multi-sig, it could be a part of a PartyDAO, it could be owning music NFTs, it could actually go and collect music NFTs by itself without me doing it. So I think that future of an NPC that's on chain is really where we're gonna have an exponential. And think about it, if you own 100 NFTs, you may pick 1 or 2 that is your favorite ones, right? 98 of them are sitting there in cold storage doing squat nothing. So it would be really cool if you could program them to do bankless quest or rabbit hole quest or whatever. And they come back and they're like, hey, your Azuki comes back and like, hey, I collected all these coins for you from all these quests. And I'm like, sick, good job. And I could then sell the Suzuki because it's super productive on OpenSea. So.
Yeah, I was gonna go with a simpler word, but participation, I think is something that I'm really excited about. I think when it comes to music, I think like on-chain curation is something that's super interesting to me. From the perspective of like in music particularly, like a lot of the major playlists today are like controlled by a couple companies, and I think there's a lot of one of the things I've been very careful with Sound is like where we don't have any like editorial playlists or anything, mainly because I think the first question I'm going to get asked is how do I get on a playlist, and so I'm super interested in like can people vote on who gets into a playlist, can people and I think Party has done a great job like on basically like participation governance. I think is something that I'm really excited about, and today like the only thing you can really do is vote on buying and selling or some of these other kind of primitives, but I think there's a lot more when it comes to kind of collectively curating that I think is interesting. I think token curated registries are underrated.
Yeah, I agree. Simon de la Rouvier, just like way ahead of his time. He was not the first, but so I think to close us off, I would love each of you. You each have 45 seconds tops to describe a moonshot idea that you have for on-chain applications or NFTs, something that you would love to see done or love to see somebody else build. Benny, I will start with you.
I already gave the room like 5 already, so I gotta be charged a subscription fee on these ones. something that we're constructing, which I think is super interesting. I think it will create recurring revenue for all the blue chips and NFT projects, and I think that's good because they're suffering because they can only do primary mints or sell toys or T-shirts. So I think it's a community name system or identity system that leverages token-bound accounts. I think that this is a killer idea that we're flying to LA to construct. So yeah, that's something that we think is super cool. Jose thought my tweet was super cool about that too. So we'll be chatting FWB. We want to help creators make reoccurring revenue rather than drops. So yeah.
You have to, Danny, go first. And
From the perspective of PartyDAO, what would be really interesting to see is so Party is this protocol and application to go use Ethereum in groups, and the whole thesis is a couple-fold. One is that there's going to be experiences you want to do with your friends, socially, with other people, where you're actually like in the same contract address together, and you're both, you're all like voting or kind of controlling like what you do together, and that just doing things together will be more fun and more interesting, and so on. The other piece of this thesis is that there's a lot of things to do on chain. And we're in a moment where, given market conditions or other things, like there isn't like a ton going on, and you occasionally kind of like get like blips of new projects, but it's mainly like people trade ERC20s or they trade NFTs, and then that's kind of it. And it's like this theme park with 2 rides. And I think if this is going to be like a whole world or universe, there should be like thousands, like millions of rides. So I think this is one reason I've stayed close to like the mud and like lattice, even 0x Park, like ecosystems, like just seeing people experiment with where like there's just like more interesting things to do on chain, things that aren't even necessarily like speculative, but even just like more for entertainment or even some like small utility. So I think like the whole gaming side of things and some of the presentations today, I think is really early and really underrated in terms of like how it's like represented in terms of on-chain activity. And I'm really excited just to see people like playing more on-chain, doing things on-chain more for entertainment. And even in our product, like we see people do that. People start parties that are on the face like really stupid, and they're just doing it to have fun with other people. And I actually think that's like more valid than we realize.
I want to add one thing. 98% of the transactions on chain right now are financial and DeFi, and like 1 or 2 or less than that are arts and culture or for fun. Like we really need to reverse that equation of 98% is art and culture and fun and gaming, entertainment, rather than all DeFi financial transactions. So,
I think for me, like I think there's a lot of things that had traction or had a lot of interest in the past that didn't end up working out because the business model around it wasn't there. And music, particularly remixes and mixtapes or two, that had huge cultures on the internet and didn't end up. Largely like remixers are still here and mixtapes still exist, but I think the monetization model around them, because ownership was so important on like where did this mixtape come from, or is it original, or is it bootleg, and remixes, like do you actually have permission to remix? And those are things that I think can be uniquely enabled by on-chain. And Benny and I have chatted about mixtapes and kind of grouping things and selling them and trading them, and just that feeling of like, because mixtape trading was, again, like something that already existed. And I think a lot of things with Sound, I always look for like things that like had like interest on the internet that just didn't end up working out at the time. And why was that? And trying to repackage that in new, fun, social ways.
Cool, awesome. We can probably take one question from the audience if there are any. If they're not, we can also move on to the final thing. Cool, awesome. Thank you guys.